everyone, I'm Michaela Kathleen, and this is my November wrap-up. So in November, I read In a Burning and the Zeros trilogy, as well as some Grimm fairy tales. So starting with In a Burning and the Grimm fairy tales, last month in October, I read the first book in the Books of Bayern series, The Goose Girl. And that was a reread. And the first time I read it, I only gave it 3 stars. It was enjoyable enough, but I wasn't super excited about it. And so I was kind of trying to decide on that reread if I wanted to continue with the series, which obviously I did. But I ordered In a Burning online while I was reading The Goose Girl. And when I finished The Goose Girl, it still took another like 2 or 3 days before this arrived in the mail. So I needed something to keep me busy, and so in the meantime, I read some Grimm fairy tales. And obviously I started with The Goose Girl, which I had read the original fairy tale of The Goose Girl after reading the retelling of The Goose Girl the first time I read it, but I had forgotten how very similar they were. Shannon Hale really did take basically every detail from the original fairy tale and put it in the book, so that was cool to see, and kind of explained why some different things that happened in the book happened, and explained some of the tonal shifts I talked about in my October wrap-up. I will link it down below. How the Goose Girl kind of feels very middle grade sometimes, but then also goes very dark, like having Falala, the horse's head, nailed to the wall. Well, it turns out that's just from the original fairy tale, so. But then yeah, I also just read some other fairy tales in here. I have read this all the way through one time, and when I did, I marked, like, in the table of contents, all of the, like, famous fairy tales, and then all of the ones that I actually liked. And so I just kind of went through and read all of those. So after reading The Goose Girl, I read The Frog Prince, which I think the most hilarious thing about The Frog Prince is the fact that the frog is not turned into a prince by being kissed. The princess literally just throws him at the wall and he turns into a prince, and that's hilarious. And yeah, really reminds you that a lot of the details have been changed in the retellings of these fairy tales. Although one thing that is true to the original fairy tales is the Brothers Grimm really did hate stepmothers. They are always evil. But yeah, then I read The Nail, which is not a famous one, but it's one that I actually kind of enjoy. Cinderella, of course, is a famous one. The Glass Coffin is kind of a cool one that's not very famous. Rapunzel, Little Red Riding Hood, Rumpelstiltskin, which is a fun one to read now that Once Upon a Time was a popular TV show. I feel like that fairy tale was kind of famous, but Once Upon a Time helped make it even more famous. And then Snow White and Rose Red, which I always kind of like that one because I read it for French class in high school. Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, of course. And then I kind of read all of the Hansel and Gretel stories. There are multiple Hansel and Gretel stories, not just the one that we know and love. I read Clever Gretel, Gambling Hansel, and then of course the original Hansel and Gretel. And Sleeping Beauty and The Goose Girl. And yeah, those are all the ones that I read with those 2 or 3 days that I had to fill up while I waited for In a Burning. So yeah, it was an enjoyable little re-dive into some of the original fairy tales. But then I read In a Burning, which I guess I'll just start off with, since I was unsure if I wanted to continue this series. I am glad I continued it. I still only gave this one 3 stars, just like The Goose Girl, and it's still kind of a very middle-of-the-road book for me, but I am glad I continued with it. It was interesting, and the 3rd book has one of my favorite characters as the main character. Each of these books focuses on a different character in the story, so I'm excited to read the 3rd book eventually. I think I'll probably read all 4 straight through, maybe sometime next year. We'll see. But yeah, I feel like the start of the book was too quick. Everything that happens at the beginning of the book seems very sudden. There's very little like story or character development. It just sort of gets right into it, and some of the stuff seems like, why is this happening? There's no setup for this. But the book does start to explore the languages a lot more. Our main character in the Goose Girl can speak to the wind, Inna can speak to fire, and like all of this and how it works gets delved into a little bit more in this book, and it's all quite interesting. But again, yeah, at the beginning of the book, we're just suddenly at war out of kind of nowhere, and Inna's brother, kind of spoiler alert, but it's very early in the book, dies pretty much right away, as does the king. And yeah, we just have two very quick deaths with characters that we didn't really get to know very well before they died, and so when they do die, it's not as emotional as it maybe should be, especially considering one of the characters that dies is our main character's brother. She's very distraught about it, but I was not. So yeah, basically the beginning, very fast, not a lot of development, and it leaves you kind of not being somewhat confused and not very emotional about what's going on. But then it starts to slow down a little and take its time and gets better. The power that Inna has to speak to fire is very dangerous. It's what kills her brother, and I think the author comes up with a good way to like incentivize her to use this power despite its danger. At the beginning of the book, they sort of hold an augury that's going to tell them like whether or not they win the war, and so they have someone from the enemy country fight someone from their country, and it's kind of whoever wins is prophesizing that that country will win the entire war. And Inna helps her side's warrior win the fight, and so she takes that as her side is going to win, but only with her help if she uses her powers. So I feel like that was a good way to give her a reason to use her powers despite the danger. I feel like she needed something to push her to do that, otherwise it would have seemed silly for her to be using this very dangerous power. And then she gets taken by the enemy and is a captive and begins this very creepy relationship with her captor. And for a while I was nervous that it was going to be kind of like the Goose Girl, where our main character in the Goose Girl meets her prince and she doesn't know that he is the prince, and then they get together at the end of the book and everything's happily ever after. And I was scared that they were going to have her captor end up being the prince of the enemy country, and they would try to do a happily ever after with that, which would have been so wrong, so bad, because this was not a healthy relationship at all. So I'm very glad that that little prediction did not come true, and he really did get shown to be a creeper who was not deserving of Inna. I like her with Finn much better. And I also really love her friendship with Razzo. Razzo is who the third book is about and is one of my favorite characters. But yeah, I think my favorite part of the whole book was actually the end of the book when Inna and Isi are traveling together and are just being girlfriends. It's super fun. Although I will say Finn showing up to rescue them did seem kind of convenient, that he would manage to find them while they're just off traveling, and I feel like they had a huge head start. Although I will admit they were probably traveling quite slowly because they're both kind of sick from their powers. And then yeah, the very, very end where they get cured also felt just a little bit quick and convenient, kind of like how the beginning everything sort of just happened right away. This also felt that way. But honestly, what sealed the deal for me on continuing the series beyond the second book, because I also wasn't sure if I didn't love the second book, I thought I might not continue the series, which I'll say I did not love the second book. It's still just acceptable. But what sealed the deal for me was the fact that the third book is about Razzo. As I've mentioned, he's one of my favorite characters, and I'm excited to see a story centering on him. So yeah, we shall see maybe next year how this series continues for me. Hopefully I'll enjoy the third book as well. And then after Inna Burning, I started the Zeros trilogy by Scott Westerfeld, Deborah Biancotti, and Margot Lanigan. So since I read all three, spoiler warning for the entire series, which the first two books were actually a reread for me. The third book was the only one I had not read yet. So this was my third time reading the first book. But yeah, I just love the concept for this series. It's a bunch of teenagers with superpowers, but not any superpowers that you've heard of before. And all of their superpowers sort of have pretty big drawbacks, or at least most of them do. So we have Scam, who has a voice that speaks for him that will say whatever anyone needs to hear in order to get him what he wants. And I feel like he makes a good main character because his power is sort of different than all the other powers. All the other powers work in large groups and his power only works one-on-one. And then also he's just kind of a conflicted character. I feel like he's the only character that feels like he might be a bad person, not just that his power is bad. And yeah, he's just, despite having this voice that will say whatever anyone needs to hear, he's just not a very confident dude. But Anon is my personal favorite. Anon's power is that nobody can remember him and nobody can focus on him if he's in a group of like 6 or more. And so it just leads to a very angsty, fun character who is very sad about his family forgetting him, which is very sad. And yeah, I just find his power to be the most intriguing. And then my second favorite is his girlfriend Flicker, who is a blind girl who can see through the eyes of everybody else. And I ship these two so much. And then we also have Bellwether, who kind of is the opposite of Anon. He brings everyone's focus towards him, and he kind of is a leader, very persuasive. And then we have Crash, who crashes technology, breaks phones and stuff, which her power also feels different to me because it's the only one that doesn't really affect people. And then we also have Mob, who kind of can control people's emotions. And in the first book, I will say her power is described very similarly to Bellwether's, and it's kind of hard to tell the difference between the two powers until you get to the second and the third book when it's made like a little more clear. But yeah, the setup for this book is just so well constructed. The character development is great, and all the characters are really relatable and interesting, and they feel very real. And all the relationships are also really well developed. I wish we had gotten more of it. I find the Flicker and her sister Lily relationship to be very interesting. On one hand, I like it. It seems very sweet with how they like make up stories for each other and stuff. But then also Lily's jealousy of the Zeros is, I don't know, not great. She seems just a little controlling of her sister. But yeah, love, love, love the setup for this book. The second half, I don't like as much as the first half, because I really like getting to know the characters and getting to know the powers, and then like the actual storyline is good. I just like getting to know the characters better. But yeah, it's really well plotted, and like none of the powers are like overpowered. Like they don't have a lot of conveniences with their powers of like getting out of things. Like with Scam's voice, for example, if there's nothing he can say to convince a person to do what he wants them to do, the voice will just turn off. So it's nice that it's not like the voice can literally just get anyone to do anything. Like he's not going to be able to convince people to do stuff that they would just, there's no way they would do it. I will say, I think I identified one thing I didn't love about the ending. I think one of the reasons I don't like it as much as the beginning of the book is that Flicker and Anonymous, my two favorite characters, don't play a super big role in the big rescue at the end. So I was just kind of missing those two. So yeah, this one for me was a 4-star read because it's super well put together, super fun, action-packed, but there was just something that made it so it wasn't like a new top fave. So I gave this one 4 stars. So then I read Swarm, of course, the second book, which this was the second time I was reading this one. And yeah, this one just immediately is not as good as the first one for me. I found the whole dance club storyline just kind of silly. Like, I get it. I get how they're like practicing their powers with it, and that's kind of what Nate, the leader, was always wanting to do, was to like practice their powers and stuff. But I don't know, it just, for me, came across a little bit silly. And then yeah, there's some awkward dialogue at the beginning, But Mob and Bellwether's powers get a little more distinct, and we get some new characters with interesting new powers, but I didn't really love the new characters. What was most interesting at the beginning was Anonymous finding out that there are other people with his power out there. So there are repeat powers, and I think having Anonymous be the first one to find that out was the most interesting one, because he often is the one that is the most hurt himself by his own power. And then in this one we get another sibling for one of our zeros. In the first book we kind of have Flicker and Lily, and then in this one we have Scam and Jess, and I like Jess a lot better than Lily. I like the idea of Lily with the whole stories, telling each other stories, that's very cute, but she's just too possessive of Flicker. Jess is a much cooler sibling, although again still very protective of her little brother, but in a less complicated, possessive way. But another big concept that's introduced in this book is the idea of the zeros being able to flip their powers to become like the opposite of what they are. And it really makes you wonder how each of the powers will flip. The biggest, most obvious flip happens with Bellwether, and that since he draws in attention to himself, his power flip is he becomes anonymous. He repels attention away from himself. And so that was really interesting and made for a very dramatic event at the end of the book. And then yeah, I continue to really enjoy the romances in this one. Flicker and Anonymous are still going strong, and I like that Scam does not end up with Mob. It's not like just an automatic, oh, he had a crush on her in the first book because he was the first one to meet her, the new zero, and so they obviously just end up together. I like that they don't end up together, and I really like her and Crash together. And on the subject of Crash, just kind of a random thing that kind of stood out to me on this reread is that Crash's mom is really kind of mean. Like, she says that her power is like a demon. Obviously, Crash's power of crashing technology can be very harmful. She can't go near hospitals and stuff for fear of crashing life-saving machinery. And so yes, there is like this dark side to Crash's power, but saying something about your daughter that is just a part of her that she cannot change about herself is a demon just seems a little extreme, and like it would give Crash some mental health issues. So yeah, this one was not as good as the first one. I just didn't really love the direction the series took. I don't know what direction I would have liked or wanted, but I feel like this one was just, the direction it went was just a little bit of a miss. It was still a fun, exciting, action-packed book. The ending was very dramatic, had a great cliffhanger, and it was still, I still love the concept of the powers and everything, but it was only a 3-star read for me. Kind of a middle-of-the-road book. And so then I finished with Nexus, and this was my first time reading Nexus, the final book in the series, which this one we got an explosion of new characters and new powers, and that led to some very interesting situations like Verity, who forces people to tell the truth against Scam's voice, which he does not control, and says anything to make people do what he wants, including a lot of lies. So it was interesting to see those two powers against each other, although we never really got a super confirmation of whether or not the voice could lie to her, because Scam just always talked to her in his regular voice. So it was an interesting thing to set up, but then it didn't really follow through very well. And in this book it was strange. At times, Bellwether, with his power flip into Anonymous, almost seemed like he was better at being anonymous than Anonymous was, which just seemed kind of strange to me. That this power that he has barely used at all, he's already better at than Anonymous. And in this book, more than the others, it felt like everyone's abilities with their powers were a little bit inconsistent for story convenience of either getting them in trouble or getting them out of trouble. Like, at times they seemed overpowered, and at times they seemed kind of underpowered compared to their kind of baseline. But along with a lot of the new characters, we also got a new take on the names. Our our main characters all pick kind of code names that explain their powers, like Anonymous. I know I always use him for all my examples when I'm talking about characters. He's definitely my favorite. But so then we get new characters who use names that seem like they could be their real names, like Verity is the one who makes people tell the truth. Piper has the same power as Bellwether, of like being a leader and drawing in people's attention, so like Pied Piper, but Piper's a real sounding name. So I found that kind of fun and nice. But then there were other things happening that felt like they didn't have, they came out of nowhere, I guess. I'm not like hugely out of nowhere, like Crash and Mob being together. In the second book, they have broken up. Crash is like, I can never be with you. It's too dangerous. I'll lose control and crash things and people will get hurt. But then in this book, they're dating again. Like, it's no big deal. And there's no like, oh, Crash decided to get back together with you for this reason. So it was just kind of out of the blue. And then this third book kind of brings Crash's power more in line with the others' power, in that suddenly she can crash people as well as technology, which like logically makes sense. Like, they say the body like is an electrical system. They make it make sense. But at the same time, like in the first book, she can't even crash things unless they're like technology that is like Wi-Fi enabled. Then it's like all technology, and then it's also people, and it just seems strange. I did kind of like in this book Bellwether getting knocked down a peg, because he's very much like the leader character, and he's not really my favorite character, and so him getting knocked down a peg was kind of fun. Another new power, this is very back and forth on the topics, but another new power that was funny was the hotness power. It's a guy who like makes everyone look at him, and since everyone's looking at him, that makes them all think he's super hot, which I just found to be a kind of hilarious power. And is also Flicker's, it's the flip of Flicker's power, which was also, I wouldn't have guessed that to be her power flip. And also like, it kind of makes all the powers already at times felt similar, like Mob and Bellwether's power feel somewhat similar. But then Flicker's reverse power, again, is kind of just drawing everyone's attention, which is what Bellwether does, just in a different way, I guess. But I thought that that guy, the beautiful boy, would be Nexus. But turns out Nexus, spoiler alert, is a machine, which kind of gets, the machine is like at the end of the book, and that's like the big ending. It's a machine that Piper, the baddie, wants to use to like project 3 of the powers across the whole world. She was going to use Crash to crash like all the banking systems and stuff, and Coin to like be able to make their own money. He's a power that can make people place value on things, and Verity to make everyone tell the truth. Basically, she's trying to reset the world and make it better with these 3 powers. But her plan goes sideways, and 3 different powers end up going out into the world. The truth power stays the same. Mob, who makes everyone emotionally feel very happy like a dance party. And Clarity, a power that makes you see things clearly. And putting these 3 powers out makes the whole world an awesome place for what seems to be forever. And I just don't know how I feel about this ending. So the 3 powers that get forced on the world last for like 8 months or so, it says, but like the whole world is fixed forever by this. And it just seems a little too easy. Like, everyone on the planet is made into a good person by this for the rest of forever. Seems a little extreme. But before that, like, very ending, there are like car chases and kidnappings and a lot of really exciting stuff, and very, very action-packed in like the final 50 pages or so. So again, still, as I've said on the first 2 books, fun, action-packed read, interesting concepts, but yeah, I don't know how I feel about how the entire thing like all wrapped up. But I did give it 3 stars. Oh, and then also, this book had quite a lot of typos, which I have noticed on recent Scott Westerfeld books. Like, it's fine, it's not big enough typos that I don't know what the book is trying to say or anything, so I don't really care. But I just have noticed that, like, his book Shatter City and then Nexus both had like an abnormal amount of typos. So yeah, random, small, not even really a complaint, because as I said, it doesn't really bother me. It's just something that I noticed. So yeah, these are the books that I read for November. I read the Zeros trilogy, In a Burning, and some fairy tales. I'm glad to be done with the Zeros trilogy finally. It was a really fun series. Overall, pretty solid. And yeah, the Books of Bayern I'll be continuing at some point. No rush really on that one. Let me know down below what you read in November. Thanks for watching. Remember, words matter.